Catherine could have accepted a neutral palace decision. What she could not ignore was the suggestion that the new arrangement had come from Camilla's own circle. Suddenly, this was no longer about Windsor protocol. It looked like a deliberate test of how much authority Catherine was expected to surrender. According to the version circulating inside the palace, Catherine was told that concerns had been raised from Camilla's side about how the Windsor appearance would look. The Queen's seniority, advisors allegedly argued, needed to be unmistakable. There could be no confusion about who occupied the stronger ceremonial position. At first, the language sounded technical, almost harmless, but Catherine had spent too long inside the monarchy to mistake positioning for simple organization. In royal life, distance can speak as loudly as words. Who walks first matters. Who stands closest to the sovereign matters. Who receives guests, who waits, who follows, and who is placed slightly behind can become part of an unspoken language of power. That was what changed everything for Catherine. If palace officials had independently rearranged the formation, she might have accepted it as protocol. But if Camilla's advisors had actively pushed for the change, then the meaning was different. It suggested that one royal household was attempting to define the public status of another. Catherine reportedly began to wonder whether this was really about one appearance at Windsor or whether something much larger was being established before William eventually became king. Camilla's position, however, carried its own emotional weight. After years of controversy, resistance, and questions surrounding her place within the monarchy, visible deference could feel like more than ceremony. It could feel like proof that the argument over her legitimacy was finally over. From that perspective, allowing Catherine to occupy an equally dominant position might appear to weaken the authority Camilla had spent years waiting to hold. That was what made the conflict dangerous. Catherine was not necessarily fighting Camilla's title. Camilla was not necessarily fighting Catherine personally. One woman represented the authority of the present reign. The other represented the future everyone inside the palace knew was coming. A senior aide reportedly tried to soften the situation by suggesting a compromise. Catherine could stand only slightly behind Camilla, close enough that the difference would not seem humiliating, but far enough to preserve the Queen's seniority. On paper, it sounded sensible. Catherine refused. By then, the argument was no longer about inches. If she accepted the compromise, she would also be accepting the principle that another household could quietly redraw her public position and expect compliance afterward. That was the line Catherine appeared unwilling to cross. Her resistance remained controlled, but word began moving through a small circle of staff that the Princess of Wales had not agreed to the revised arrangement. Suddenly, the tension was no longer theoretical. The appearance was approaching. Camilla's side expected seniority to be protected. Catherine's side refused to be quietly pushed backward. And one person had not yet fully entered the dispute. William, the greatest danger was no longer whether Catherine would move. It was what William would do when he discovered exactly why she had been asked to. And when William finally saw the revised order for himself, the disagreement stopped being a private issue between two royal households and became a direct challenge involving the future king. William did not need a long explanation. One look at the revised Windsor arrangement told him exactly what Catherine had been reacting to. The placement might have appeared insignificant to outsiders, but to a man raised inside royal protocol, it carried a message about authority that was impossible to miss. He studied the order carefully and immediately saw the shift. Catherine had not simply been moved a few steps. Her position had been altered in a way that placed her more clearly beneath Camilla, and William understood what that could imply. He had grown up inside a system where small ceremonial details were rarely meaningless. Rank could be communicated through entrances, seating, distance, and precedence, long before anyone said a word. That was why his reaction worried the aides around him. He did not explode. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he became unusually controlled. That silence was more unsettling. Catherine reportedly explained that she had never objected to Camilla being treated with the respect of a queen. That was not the issue. What concerned her was that the Wales household appeared to have been repositioned without meaningful consultation, as if its public role could simply be adjusted by another circle of advisors. William immediately saw the institutional danger. If the Prince and Princess of Wales could be moved whenever another household demanded clearer dominance, then where did the authority of the current reign end? And where did the independence of the future reign begin? His next question reportedly changed the atmosphere completely. Who authorized it? And more importantly, had Charles personally approved the change? The hesitation that followed told William enough to know the situation was more complicated than anyone had admitted. Palace staff were trapped. If they blamed Camilla's advisors, they risked exposing a private attempt to strengthen her position. If they said Charles had agreed, the dispute would instantly become a confrontation between father and son. William also understood another danger. Catherine could easily be portrayed as jealous, difficult, or unwilling to respect Camilla's rank. He refused to allow that narrative to take hold. From his perspective, this was about procedure, precedent, and respect between royal households, not personal competition between two women. So, he made his position clear. Catherine would remain where she had originally expected to stand, unless Charles himself directly ordered otherwise. That decision changed the balance immediately. Catherine was no longer resisting alone. William had placed his own authority beside hers, turning what had begun as a quiet refusal into a test of how much influence the Prince of Wales was prepared to exercise. When Camilla was informed that William had intervened, the problem became impossible to contain. What had started as a question of positioning now carried the weight of succession, loyalty, and competing centers of power. Yet William's support created an even more dangerous question, because if Charles stepped in and overruled his son, Windsor could become the setting for a royal power struggle no aide could quietly erase. Charles had spent years balancing personal loyalty with the demands of the crown, but the Windsor dispute placed those two forces directly against each other. Supporting Camilla risked humiliating William and Catherine. Supporting William risked exposing the Queen's authority as weaker than everyone had been told. By the time Charles was fully briefed, the disagreement had already moved beyond protocol. William had made it clear that Catherine would not simply be shifted backward, because another household wanted a stronger display of seniority. That left Charles facing a problem his advisors knew could not be solved with one easy command. Technically, he could settle everything immediately. He was the king. But emotionally and politically, any order would carry consequences far beyond Windsor. His advisors reportedly warned him that forcing Catherine to move might end the dispute on paper while deepening the fracture inside the family. Camilla, however, allegedly saw the matter differently. After years of fighting for acceptance, yielding now could make her appear decorative rather than powerful. Especially beside Catherine, whose public standing seemed to grow stronger with every major royal appearance. For Camilla, the front position could represent recognition. For William, it represented interference. That distinction became central when father and son spoke. William was not challenging Camilla's title. He was not arguing that she should be denied respect. His objection was far more specific. Her position as queen could not become a tool for controlling the Wales household. Charles understood immediately why that argument was so difficult to dismiss. His reign depended on continuity. but William increasingly represented the monarchy that would come after him. Any attempt to weaken his son's independence could create a much larger struggle than the one they were trying to contain. Catherine, meanwhile, deliberately stayed away from the direct exchange. She understood how easily the story could be reduced to two women competing for status. By remaining silent, she forced the real issue into the open. This was now between Charles and William, between present authority and future power. Charles attempted compromise. Rather than moving Catherine alone, he suggested adjusting several family positions, making the final formation look like a broader ceremonial change. It was elegant. It was diplomatic. And William rejected it. If Catherine was visibly moved after objecting, he believed the damage would already be done. The palace would protect itself, Camilla's advisors would escape scrutiny, and Catherine could be left carrying the reputation of someone who resisted protocol and then lost. That possibility placed Charles under even greater pressure. Supporting Camilla too aggressively risked reviving the painful perception that personal loyalty to his wife could outweigh institutional stability. Yet overruling her side risked exposing limits to the authority she believed her title guaranteed. Everyone expected Charles to decide. Instead, he hesitated. And that hesitation mattered. It suggested that William's position could no longer be dismissed as the complaint of a son expected to fall into line. He had leverage now. Enough leverage to make the king pause. Charles's hesitation bought the palace time, but it also gave William something far more valuable: the chance to rewrite the Windsor arrangement before Camilla's advisors could regain control. The breakthrough did not come from a dramatic argument. It came from William quietly changing the logic of the entire formation. Instead of forcing Catherine backward or Camilla forward, he created an arrangement that protected his wife and, in doing so, exposed how much influence the heir now possessed. William's solution was careful, because it did not openly challenge Camilla's rank. Instead of treating the Windsor appearance as one rigid line of seniority, he reportedly pushed for a formation built around separate royal roles. Catherine would remain prominently beside him, presenting the Prince and Princess of Wales as a united household with responsibilities of their own. Camilla would still receive the dignity expected of the Queen, but the specific front position her advisors had allegedly wanted would no longer require Catherine to surrender ground. It was a subtle move, but everyone involved understood its meaning. Palace officials quickly realized that William had solved the immediate problem without accepting the principle behind it. Nobody could easily accuse him of disrespecting Camilla, because her status remained intact. Yet Catherine had not been pushed backward either. The Wales household had protected its independence, and it had done so without creating the kind of public confrontation Charles had feared. Camilla reportedly understood immediately what had happened. Technically, she had not been demoted. Her title remained unquestioned. Her ceremonial importance remained clear. But the precedent her circle had allegedly tried to establish had been blocked. Catherine would not be required to visibly diminish herself simply to make Camilla's authority appear stronger. Charles ultimately accepted the revised formation. For him, it offered the least damaging path forward. The family could appear united, Camilla's dignity could be preserved, and William would not feel that Catherine had been sacrificed for the sake of palace convenience. Catherine said very little. That silence gave the moment even more weight. Her original refusal had now achieved something far larger than keeping a single place at Windsor. It had forced the palace to recognize a boundary. William's intervention made clear that he was prepared to defend not only his wife personally, but the institutional position of the household they represented together. And that realization unsettled some courtiers. For the first time, the disagreement seemed to expose two centers of royal influence operating at once. Charles and Camilla embodied the authority of the present reign. William and Catherine carried the certainty of what would come next. As long as those interests remained aligned, the monarchy could function smoothly. But Windsor had revealed what could happen when they were not. Suddenly, future disputes over patronages, residences, ceremonial precedence, access, and even royal jewels no longer seemed harmless. Each could become another test of where one household's authority ended and the other's began. And that was where the emotional balance shifted. Camilla had secured the title she had waited years to hold. Catherine did not yet possess that title. But she possessed something protocol could not freeze in place forever: succession. But the deepest consequence was still hidden, because the Windsor argument had reminded Camilla that Catherine possessed something no ceremonial order could easily control: the growing expectation that one day everything would pass to her. The front position lasted only minutes. The future it represented could last decades. Behind the disagreement was an uncomfortable truth nobody at Windsor could escape. Camilla held the higher rank now, but Catherine stood closer every year to inheriting the role, influence, jewels, and symbolism surrounding the Queen. That was why the Windsor dispute could not remain only about placement. The deeper tension came from succession itself. Every comparison between Camilla and Catherine carried more weight, because Catherine was not simply another senior royal. She represented what would come next. The title, the ceremonial authority, the residences, the heirlooms, and the powerful symbols attached to queenship all existed within a system built around continuity. What belonged to the present reign would not remain fixed forever. Camilla was allegedly deeply aware of that reality. Some of the most emotionally charged objects connected to royal women were not ordinary possessions. Jewels, historic pieces, ceremonial privileges, and certain residences could be tied to office, tradition, or the wider royal collection. They carried history, memory, and authority, and that meant their meaning could shift the moment the crown passed to the next generation. Catherine, however, reportedly refused to behave like someone desperate to claim the future early. That was part of what made her position so powerful. She did not need to compete openly for every jewel, every room, or every ceremonial advantage. Time was already moving in her direction. The stronger message was that she would wait for what was properly hers while refusing to be unnecessarily pushed away from the role she already held. William's intervention at Windsor only strengthened that position. He had shown that Catherine's future status would not be treated as something distant or irrelevant whenever palace politics became uncomfortable. He was willing to defend the boundaries around their household now, not only after he became king. That reportedly unsettled some inside Camilla's circle. If the Wales household could resist pressure over something as visible as ceremonial placement and emerge without serious consequences, what else could it resist? What happened when the disagreement involved patronages? Residences? Access? Or pieces from the royal collection carrying generations of emotional meaning? Charles could try to protect Camilla from feeling overshadowed. He could support her dignity and reinforce her importance during his reign. But even the king could not erase the basic direction of succession. William stood next in line, and Catherine stood beside him. That made Catherine's refusal at Windsor psychologically different from a simple challenge. She did not need Camilla's place. She needed only to prevent anyone from quietly weakening her own. And soon, that distinction would be tested again. Because another private discussion was beginning to surface, this time involving something far more sensitive than where Catherine stood. It involved what she might one day wear. And that answer came when palace discussions moved from where Catherine would stand to something even more emotionally charged: what she would eventually be entitled to wear. Positions could be rearranged in minutes. Royal jewels carried centuries of memory. When another private discussion reportedly emerged over which pieces Catherine might one day inherit or wear, the Windsor confrontation suddenly looked less like a misunderstanding and more like the first battle over an approaching transfer of symbolism. The conversation was allegedly narrow at first. Which jewels belonged with the reigning queen? Which pieces could be worn by senior royal women? And which traditions should remain untouched until the next reign? But inside the monarchy, questions like these were never only about diamonds and pearls. Certain pieces carried the memory of previous queens, the shadow of Diana, the long reign of Elizabeth II, and the emotional weight of continuity itself. To wear them was not simply to borrow beauty. It was to step into history. Camilla's household reportedly wanted clear boundaries. During Charles's lifetime, pieces closely associated with queenship should remain under the authority of the reigning queen. Catherine did not challenge that principle. She understood hierarchy, and she understood timing. What concerned her advisors was something more lasting: any attempt to turn temporary access into permanent restriction. That was where William's position hardened. He reportedly saw the same pattern he had seen at Windsor. The current household had every right to manage the present. It did not, however, have the right to quietly shape the future beyond its own reign. If rules were being written now that could limit Catherine later, then the issue was no longer about jewelry. It was about power. And once again, Catherine refused to personalize the dispute. She did not demand immediate access. She did not present herself as competing with Camilla. That restraint made the tension more difficult to dismiss, because it denied critics the easiest explanation. This was not jealousy. It was a question of whether present rank could be used to narrow future authority. Charles began to understand the danger. Every time he stepped in to strengthen Camilla's position, he risked forcing William to defend Catherine more openly. The more William intervened, the more visible the divide became. What had once been handled through quiet custom was becoming something closer to negotiation between two royal households. Some courtiers allegedly concluded that Windsor had changed the palace equation. William had shown that he would no longer accept vague protocol when it affected Catherine's standing. Now the same principle was being applied to heirlooms, tradition, and the symbols that would one day surround her as queen. That was the emotional twist hidden beneath the entire conflict. Catherine's refusal at Windsor had never truly been about taking Camilla's place. It was about stopping a temporary hierarchy from becoming a permanent limitation. She could accept that Camilla held the higher rank now. What she would not accept was the suggestion that the present could quietly decide the boundaries of her future. And William, by this point, appeared to agree completely. By the time the jewel discussion ended, William had already reached a conclusion that would shape every future confrontation. Catherine would respect the crown, but she would never again be expected to shrink simply to make another royal feel secure. The Windsor appearance ended without an explosion, an accusation, or a public scene. Yet inside the monarchy, something fundamental had shifted. William had shown that Catherine's position would no longer be negotiated around her. Camilla had discovered the limits of protocol, and Charles had witnessed the future arriving early. What had seemed like a small disagreement over placement now looked very different. Catherine had held her ground without humiliating Camilla, without openly challenging Charles, and without turning the moment into a personal rivalry. That restraint mattered. She had not demanded Camilla's position. She had simply refused to let her own be quietly reduced. William's response was what changed everything. He had done more than support his wife emotionally. He had challenged the very mechanism that allowed another royal household to redefine Catherine's role without proper consultation. By refusing to accept the revised arrangement automatically, William sent a message that the Wales household could no longer be treated as something that would simply adjust whenever palace pressure demanded it. Charles's hesitation reinforced that shift. He did not overrule William outright, and that silence created a precedent of its own. The Prince and Princess of Wales were increasingly being treated not merely as senior family members, but as an independent center of authority whose position had to be negotiated with, not dictated to. Camilla still held the title of Queen. Her ceremonial dignity remained intact. Her seniority in the current reign was not erased. But Windsor appeared to reveal a limit. Rank could establish order. It could not automatically give one household unlimited power over another. Catherine emerged stronger precisely because she never appeared desperate for the front position. Her argument had always been about boundaries, dignity, and the future. That made it harder to dismiss as ambition. William's loyalty carried an even deeper emotional meaning. The monarchy had long demanded that personal relationships bend beneath institutional expectations, but here, William seemed willing to insist that protecting the institution did not require sacrificing Catherine's standing inside it. And the consequences could reach far beyond Windsor. Future state ceremonies, residences, public roles, inheritance, royal jewels, and even the gradual transfer of influence between generations could now carry the same question: who has the right to decide where William and Catherine belong? For Charles, that reality was uncomfortable. Preserving peace with William might sometimes require disappointing Camilla, yet defending Camilla too aggressively could push his son toward even greater independence. That was the lasting power of the Windsor dispute. The position itself lasted only one appearance. William's reaction may have changed the rules for every confrontation that followed. Catherine did not seize Camilla's position. She refused to surrender her own, and William made certain the palace understood the difference.